My name is Elena Marquez. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a licensed physical therapist in San Diego. 3 weeks ago, I stood beside my father's casket while my older brother announced, calmly, confidently, that he had inherited everything: the house, the business, the savings, everything. And according to the will he held in his hand, I wasn't mentioned at all. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just stood there staring at the polished wood of the coffin, listening to the low hum of whispered condolences in the chapel, and felt something inside me turn cold. Because the last conversation I had with my father, 3 nights before he died, doesn't match what my brother claims. Not even close. And what happened 10 minutes later when the family lawyer cleared his throat and said, "There's one more document," changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the moment it began. It was a gray Tuesday morning in March. The chapel smelled like lilies and furniture polish. My father, Daniel Marquez, had always hated lilies. He said they smelled like hospitals. My brother Mateo chose them anyway. Mateo is 36. He's always known how to look composed when it matters. Navy suit. Perfect posture. A firm handshake for every guest. He was accepting condolences like a politician on campaign. I watched him from across the room, and I knew something was wrong. He wasn't grieving. He was managing. There's a difference. When the service ended, we moved into a smaller private room with close family. That's when Mr. Callahan, my father's attorney of 20 years, unfolded a document from a leather folder. Mateo stepped forward before he even began speaking. "I'll handle this," he said. Smooth. Confident. He read the will himself. Apparently, Dad had revised it 8 months ago. Apparently, the family auto repair business, Marquez Auto, founded in 1989, was now solely Mateo's. The house in Chula Vista? Mateo's. The investment accounts? Mateo's. There was a line about me. Elena has demonstrated financial independence and therefore requires no further provision. I actually felt my ears ring. Financial independence? I rent a one-bedroom apartment. I have student loans. I drive a 6-year-old Honda with a dented bumper. Independent? Yes. Expendable? No. I looked at Mr. Callahan. He avoided my eyes. And then, Mateo did something I'll never forget. He squeezed my shoulder. "You've always been strong, Lena," he said quietly. "Dad knew you'd be fine." Dad never called me Lena. Only Mateo did. Curiosity loop number 1. Why would my father cut me out when he paid for my graduate school applications himself? Curiosity loop number 2. Why did Mateo already have the updated will printed and highlighted? Curiosity loop number 3. Why did my father tell me, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and fear, "You'll both be taken care of"? I didn't confront him there. Funerals are theater. Everyone plays their assigned role. Mateo's role was responsible son. Mine was grieving daughter. But inside, something didn't add up. 3 nights before Dad passed, I'd been the one at his bedside. Mateo had been traveling for work. Dad's voice was weak, but his mind was clear. "Elena," he said, gripping my hand, "the trust. Make sure—" A nurse interrupted us to adjust his IV. When I looked back at him, he'd closed his eyes. He never finished the sentence. I thought he meant the business trust. The standard estate planning he'd mentioned years ago. I didn't know there was another one, and Mateo never mentioned a trust. He only mentioned the will. After the reading, relatives filtered out awkwardly. A few avoided eye contact. A few gave me sympathetic half smiles. One aunt whispered, "Maybe your dad had his reasons." Reasons. That word echoed in my head all afternoon. When I finally stepped outside, the sky had cleared. The sun was too bright for a day like that. Mateo was leaning against his BMW. scrolling on his phone. "You okay?" he asked, without looking up. "I didn't know about the revision," I said. He shrugged. "Dad and I handled it months ago. You were busy with your clinic. Busy helping patients relearn how to walk. Busy paying my own bills. Busy being the daughter who showed up." "You could have told me," I said. "It would have just upset you." That was his pattern. Protect me by excluding me. He opened his car door, then paused. "I'll give you time to process," he added. "But I need to move quickly on restructuring the business. There are decisions to make." Restructuring. The word felt surgical, like he was preparing to cut something out. That night, I went back to my apartment and pulled out an old shoebox from my closet. Inside were birthday cards from Dad, postcards from business trips, a napkin with a sketch of the auto shop floor plan from when I was 12, and one envelope I'd never opened. It was dated 9 months ago. My name written in Dad's uneven handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sentence. "Ilana, some things are protected in ways you may not yet understand." No explanation. No instructions. Just that. Protected how? Protected from who? If you've ever had that moment where reality tilts slightly off center, you know the feeling. Not dramatic. Just wrong. By midnight, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to accuse Mateo. Not yet. I was going to request a full copy of every document, every revision, every amendment. And I was going to speak to Mr. Callahan alone, because my father did not build a business from nothing, work 6 days a week for 33 years, and then erase his daughter without explanation. Something was missing, and the answer was sitting somewhere in a folder I hadn't seen yet. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mateo. "We need to meet at the office. Urgent." I stared at the screen. Then another message came through. "Also, the lawyer forgot to mention something yesterday." My stomach tightened. Forgot? Or avoided? I typed back one word. "What?" 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, his reply came through. "It's complicated." And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about control. And someone had underestimated me. When I think about Mateo, I don't start with the funeral. I start with the kitchen. Not the warm kind with cookies and laughter. Our kitchen was always half-lit, the overhead bulb flickering like it was tired too. The linoleum floor had a worn path from the sink to the fridge to the back door, because my dad used it like a hallway between work and sleep. And Mateo, my brother, learned early that the shortest distance between what you want and what you get is other people's guilt. I didn't have words for it when we were kids. I just felt it. The way the air shifted when Mateo walked into a room. The way my father's shoulders loosened just a little, like Mateo's presence offered him relief. I was the second child. The surprise, as my aunt liked to say with that brittle laugh. Mateo arrived first, the son my father expected. The one he could picture wearing coveralls and taking over the shop one day. I arrived 4 years later, and even though Dad loved me, he did. There was always this quiet, unspoken agreement in the family that Mateo was the centerpiece, and I was extra, not unwanted, just not essential. I remember being 9, sitting on the back steps with a scraped knee, watching Dad and Mateo in the driveway. Dad was teaching him how to change a tire. Mateo had a wrench in his hand like it was a trophy. "Good grip," Dad said. "That's my boy." I cleared my throat from the steps. "Can I try?" Dad looked up, squinting in the sun. "Sweetheart, this is heavy work." "I can do it," I insisted, already standing. Mateo smiled at me. Not a mean smile. Worse. A patient smile. Like I was cute for thinking I could belong in their world. Dad wiped his hands on a rag. Go help your mom inside, okay? That was the first time I learned what it feels like to be redirected without being rejected outright. It's subtle, almost kind, and it leaves you confused enough to blame yourself. Mateo didn't need my father to say, "You matter more." He could tell by what Dad didn't say to me, and he used that. By middle school, Mateo was the type of kid teachers praised and other kids followed. Not because he was generous, he wasn't, but because he was smooth. He always knew what adults wanted to hear. He could apologize without meaning it. He could look remorseful, with dry eyes. I remember the first real crack between us. I was 13. Mateo was 17 and already driving. Dad had a strict rule. Nobody touched the business cash drawer except him. But one afternoon, Dad called from the shop and asked me to bring him the bank deposit envelope from the kitchen drawer. I found it where it always was, thick with weekend receipts. I walked it down the street to the shop, careful like I was carrying something fragile. Dad met me at the back entrance. He took it from me, glanced inside, and his whole face changed. He didn't yell. That's the part that still sticks with me. He just went still. "Elena," he said quietly, "did you open this?" "No," I said. "You told me not to." He stared for a long time like he was weighing something. Then he turned and called Mateo from under the hood of a car. Mateo came wiping grease from his hands, looking mildly annoyed. Dad held up the envelope. "There's money missing." Mateo didn't blink. "Are you saying I took it?" "I'm saying it's missing." Mateo's eyes slid to me, quick as a flicker. "Maybe Elena grabbed some for her school thing." My mouth dropped open. "What?" "I didn't." Mateo shrugged. "She's always buying stuff. Art supplies, those notebooks. Maybe she didn't want to ask." I remember the shame that hit me first, even before the anger, because part of me wondered if Dad would believe him. Dad looked at me, not accusing, just tired. "Did you?" he asked. And there it was. The moment. Not did Mateo? Not, why would your sister do that? Just, did you? I whispered. "No." Mateo gave this little sigh, like he was disappointed in me for making it difficult. Dad stared down at the envelope, then back at Mateo. "We'll talk later." Later never really came. A week after that, Dad handed Mateo his own key to the shop. And I understood the system clearly for the first time. Mateo could create a problem and still be rewarded, because my father didn't want the stress of confronting him. My father preferred peace over truth, and Mateo knew it. As we got older, the dynamic didn't improve. It got cleaner, more polished. Mateo never hit me, never screamed in my face. He didn't need that kind of violence. His was psychological. If I got praise, he'd reframe it. "Oh, Elena's good at school," he'd say at dinner, smiling. "She likes things you can do sitting down." If Dad complimented my grades, Mateo would laugh like it was adorable. "Good thing you've got the brains," he'd tell me. "I've got everything else." He said it like a joke, but he meant it like a verdict. My mother tried, in her quiet way. She'd squeeze my hand under the table or leave little notes in my lunchbox. But she was also exhausted, working shifts at a pharmacy, coming home to cook, wash, collapse, and my father. My father lived in the shop. Even when he was home, his mind was still under the hood of something. So Mateo filled the space. He became the translator between Dad's silence and the world, the interpreter, the gatekeeper. When I was 18 and applying to college, I sat at the kitchen table with forms spread out in front of me. Dad came in, smelling like oil and cigarettes, and looked at the tuition numbers like they were written in another language. Mateo leaned on the counter behind him. "Community college makes sense," Mateo said. "Save money, stay close, help out when Dad needs it." Dad nodded slowly like Mateo had solved an equation. I swallowed hard. "I got into SDSU." Mateo tilted his head. That's expensive. I got scholarships, I said, voice shaking. Dad finally looked at me. You really want to go? Yes. He hesitated, then nodded once. Okay. Mateo's eyes sharpened for half a second before he smoothed his expression again. If that's what you want. That phrase always sounded supportive, but it never felt like it. It felt like a receipt being printed, like he was keeping track. And still, I tried. God, I tried. I tried to be the good daughter, the low-maintenance one, the one who didn't add pressure. I told myself Mateo was just competitive, just protective of Dad, just stressed. But every time I let my guard down, I paid for it. By my 20s, I was living on my own, building my career, treating patients who were rebuilding themselves from injury and trauma. And I was learning something strange. People could lose the use of their legs and still fight like hell to walk again. But families? Families could make you doubt your right to stand at all. The last holiday we spent as a whole family, before my mom passed, before Dad got sick, was Thanksgiving, 6 years ago. I remember it because Mateo brought wine that cost more than my weekly groceries, and he made a big show of pouring it for Dad first. He sat beside Dad, like a shadow that wanted to be seen. Halfway through dinner, Dad said, Elena's got a steady job. She's doing good. Mateo lifted his glass. Yeah, he said. She's independent. Independent. The word was supposed to be a compliment, but in Mateo's mouth, it sounded like a reason to be excluded. That's what I thought about when I read the line in the will. Financial independence. It wasn't Dad's language. It was Mateo's. And that's the part that kept scraping at me, quietly, every hour after the funeral. Because if Mateo had been shaping my father's decisions for years, if he had been the gatekeeper of information, the interpreter of stress, the son who handled things, then it wasn't impossible that he'd handled this too. And suddenly that sentence from Dad's unopened note felt heavier than paper. Some things are protected in ways you may not yet understand. Protected? From who? When Mateo texted me the next morning, we need to meet at the office. Urgent. I didn't even finish my coffee. I stood in my kitchen staring at the cracked screen of my phone, realizing something with a clarity that almost made me dizzy. Whatever was coming next wasn't new. It was the next step in a pattern that had been building my whole life. And this time, I wasn't 13 on the back steps. I was 32, and I was done being redirected. The morning Mateo texted me, I drove to Marquez Auto with my hands locked tight around the steering wheel. It was 8:17 a.m. I remember because I kept staring at the dashboard clock like it might slow things down. The shop looked exactly the same. Same faded red sign, same oil-stained concrete, same roll-up doors rattling in the wind. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like territory. Mateo was already there. Of course he was. His BMW was parked in Dad's old spot, the one closest to the office door. That detail hit me harder than I expected. Dad used to say, "Earn that spot." Mateo hadn't earned anything yet. He'd just claimed it. I walked inside. The air smelled like rubber and gasoline, and something metallic that always clung to my clothes when I left. It used to comfort me. That morning, it made my chest tight. Mateo was in Dad's office. He'd rearranged it. That's what I noticed first. Dad's old leather chair was gone, replaced with a sleek black one. The framed photo of me and Dad at my college graduation was no longer on the wall. In its place was a new certificate, Mateo's name printed in bold, Managing Director. He stood when I entered. "Elena," he said smoothly, "thanks for coming." I didn't sit. "You said it was urgent." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please." I stayed standing, his jaw flexed just slightly, a crack in the composure. There's been a complication, he said. With what? With the estate. My stomach dropped. What complication? He opened a folder and slid a document toward me. It wasn't the will. It was a debt summary. My father's business accounts had been leveraged, loans taken out against the property, equipment financing, lines of credit. The numbers blurred for a second. What is this? I asked. Mateo clasped his hands. Dad expanded too quickly last year. He didn't tell you because he didn't want to worry you. That sentence again. He didn't want to worry you. He refinanced the house, Mateo continued, to cover payroll during the supply chain mess. It was risky. My pulse started to pound. How much? I asked quietly. Almost 800,000. I actually laughed. It came out sharp and wrong. That's not possible. It is. I scanned the dates. The loans were signed 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Dad was already sick. 6 months ago, Mateo had started handling more things. You co-signed, I said. It wasn't a question. Mateo didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. The room went very still. So, when you say you inherited everything, I said slowly, you also inherited almost $1 million in debt. Technically, yes. Technically? He leaned forward. The will transfers ownership to me, which means the liabilities are mine. But the assets were evaluated before the market dip. If I liquidate the property now, we won't cover the loans. We. The word slipped out before he could catch it. I'm not on the will, I reminded him. He exhaled. That's what we need to discuss. There it was. The pivot. He slid another paper toward me. This is a family agreement draft, he said. If you sign, you'll assume partial responsibility for the debt. In exchange, I'll allocate you 20% equity once the business stabilizes. I stared at him. You cut me out of the inheritance, I said, slowly. And now you want me to help pay for it? His expression hardened for the first time. It's not that simple. Explain it to me like I'm 5. He stood up then, pacing once behind the desk. Dad was drowning, Elena. He made bad calls. I tried to fix it. I put my name on those loans to protect the shop, to protect his legacy. And if this collapses, his name collapses with it. There it was. Legacy. Guilt dressed up like duty. If you care about Dad, Mateo continued quietly, you'll help. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Clarity. Did he know how bad it was? I asked. Mateo hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. You didn't tell him, I said. It would have stressed him out. You made financial decisions he didn't fully understand. I was trying to save him. From what? The truth? He slammed his palm lightly against the desk. Not loud, but sharp. You don't get to judge me. You weren't here. I stepped closer. I was at the hospital. Every night. Silence. The mechanics outside kept working. The sound of an impact wrench echoed through the bay like distant thunder. Mateo's voice dropped. If this fails, Elena, the bank takes the house. Dad's house. The house. The place where every birthday, every Christmas, every scraped knee happened. He watched my face carefully. And then he delivered the real blow. There's one more thing. My chest tightened. What? The lawyer mentioned a trust yesterday because there is one, but it's inactive. Inactive? It requires dual beneficiary signatures to access. I felt my breath catch. Dual beneficiaries? Yes. Who? He looked at me directly. You and me. The room tilted. Dad set it up years ago, Mateo continued. But it's structured so that both beneficiaries have to agree on disbursement. Otherwise, it stays locked. How much is in it? He paused. Just under 1.2 million. The number hit me like a physical force. There was money, I whispered. Yes. And you didn't mention this at the funeral. It's complicated. Stop saying that. His eyes sharpened. If we unlock it, the funds will be used to stabilize the business. That's the smartest move. For who? For the family. The word sounded hollow. And if I don't agree? I asked. Mateo held my gaze. Then the trust stays frozen. The debt compounds. The bank circles. And Dad's name becomes a cautionary tale. There it was. The trap. He didn't need to steal the inheritance outright. He just needed to corner me into giving it back voluntarily. My throat felt tight, but my voice stayed steady. I want to see the trust documents. You can. Alone. With the lawyer. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Fine. He sat back down, smoothing his tie. But think carefully before you make this emotional. This is business. Business. Like we weren't standing in the wreckage of our father's life, like he hadn't just admitted to reshaping everything behind closed doors. I picked up the unsigned agreement and folded it once. I won't sign anything today. Mateo's jaw tightened. We don't have time. I do. I turned toward the door. Elena? He said. I paused. If you walk away from this, he said quietly, you're choosing pride over family. I didn't turn around. No, I said. I'm choosing truth. And I walked out. The sunlight outside felt harsh. I got into my car and locked the doors. And then, for the first time since the funeral, I broke. Not loud sobbing, just silent tears sliding down my face while I stared at the steering wheel. 800,000 in debt. A hidden trust worth over $1 million. Dual signatures required. And a brother who had positioned himself as both savior and victim. I pulled out my phone. There was a voicemail from Mr. Callahan, left an hour earlier. Elena, his voice said, careful and measured. We need to speak privately before any documents are signed. There are structural details about the trust your father insisted remain confidential until after his service. Structural details. Confidential. Until after the service. My heart started beating faster again, because suddenly this didn't feel like damage control. It felt like a design. And for the first time since Dad died, I wondered if he had anticipated all of this. I didn't go back to work that afternoon. I drove to the beach instead. There's a stretch of shoreline near Coronado where the sand flattens out and the tide pulls back just enough to leave a mirror of water across the surface. When I was a kid, Dad used to take us there on Sundays before the shop opened. Mateo would race the waves. I would collect shells and line them up in careful rows. Dad would stand between us. Always between us. I parked and sat in the car for almost 20 minutes before stepping out. The wind was cold, sharp enough to sting. I welcomed it. It kept me from spiraling. Structural details, confidential until after the service. The words looped in my head like a broken track. I called Mr. Callahan back. He answered on the second ring. Elena, he said, lowering his voice. Are you somewhere private? Yes. I would prefer we meet in person. Is this about the trust? A pause. Yes. Did my father revise the will under pressure? I asked. Another pause. I can't discuss motivations over the phone. My throat tightened. Then tell me this. Did he understand what he was signing? Elena, he said gently, your father was competent. That wasn't the question I asked. We agreed to meet the next morning at his office downtown. When I hung up, I felt strangely alone. Not abandoned, just unshielded. That night, Mateo called 3 times. I didn't answer. He left one voicemail. I'm not your enemy, Lena. We need to act fast. Call me. I replayed it twice. The tone was calm, controlled. But beneath it, I heard urgency. Not grief. not fear. Urgency. If you've ever dealt with someone who positions themselves as the solution to a problem they helped create, you know how disorienting it feels. You question your own instincts. You start wondering if you're being dramatic. I almost convinced myself to call him back. Almost. Instead, I pulled out the shoebox again. I reread Dad's note. Some things are protected in ways you may not yet understand. Protected. The word felt different now. Less vague. More intentional. The next morning, I wore navy slacks and a white blouse. Neutral. Professional. I didn't want to look emotional. I wanted to look precise. Mr. Callahan's office was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels padded. He closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit. "Elena," he said carefully, folding his hands on the desk. "Before I explain the trust structure, I need to clarify something. Your father created two separate legal instruments." "Two?" I asked. "Yes. The first is the revocable living trust attached to the will. That's the one Mateo referenced." "And the second?" He opened a file drawer and pulled out a thin binder. "This," he said, placing it in front of me, "is an irrevocable discretionary trust established 12 years ago." 12 years. I blinked. 12? I repeated. "Yes. It predates the recent loans. It predates your father's illness." My hands felt cold. "Who are the beneficiaries?" He looked directly at me. "You." Silence filled the room. "Just me?" I whispered. "Yes." I stared at the binder, like it might disappear. "How much?" I asked. 1.2 million in diversified investments, conservatively managed. My heart began to pound. Mateo said the trust required both signatures. Mr. Callahan's expression shifted, just slightly. He was referring to the revocable trust. This one does not require dual consent. The room tilted. "So he doesn't have access to this?" "No." "Does he know about it?" A pause. "He was informed of its existence." My pulse quickened. "When?" "After your father's passing." The air felt thin. "Why was it kept separate?" I asked. Mr. Callahan exhaled slowly. "Your father was concerned about internal pressure. He feared that joint control might lead to coercion." The word hit hard. Coercion. "He anticipated conflict?" I asked quietly. "Yes." The realization unfolded slowly, painfully. Dad hadn't cut me out. He'd divided the estate intentionally. The business to Mateo. The secured trust to me. Separate. Protected. In ways I did not yet understand. I felt tears rise, but I held them back. "Why didn't you mention this at the funeral?" "Your father's instructions were clear. The irrevocable trust disclosure was to occur only after the will was read and any immediate reactions surfaced." He studied my face carefully. I needed to see how events unfolded. My stomach dropped. "You were observing?" "Yes." "For what?" "For pressure." The room went very quiet. Mateo had moved quickly. Too quickly. He'd framed the narrative. He'd presented debt and urgency. He'd offered me equity in exchange for assuming liability. He'd described a dual signature trust that required cooperation. But he had never mentioned that a separate trust existed solely in my name. He wasn't just managing optics. He was attempting to redirect the flow of money. And if I had signed that agreement yesterday, I would have voluntarily unlocked funds to cover debts I never approved. Debts possibly taken under incomplete disclosure. My hands trembled slightly on the desk. "What are the restrictions?" I asked. "The trust allows discretionary distributions for housing, investment, business creation, or personal financial security. However, it cannot be legally compelled to satisfy your brother's business liabilities." Relief flooded me, followed by something sharper. Anger. Not explosive, cold, measured. He wants me to unlock the revocable trust to bail him out, I said. That appears to be his position. And if I refuse? The revocable trust remains frozen. The business debt remains his responsibility. Silence stretched between us. I stared at the binder. $1.2 million. Not a fortune in California real estate terms, but enough to breathe, enough to choose, enough to refuse manipulation. And that's when the isolation hit. Not because I was alone, but because I realized something quietly devastating. My father had expected this. He had built legal walls because he knew his children, because he knew Mateo, and because he knew me. He knew I would hesitate. He knew I would feel guilty. He knew I would try to fix what wasn't mine to fix. If you've ever been the responsible one in a family, you know how heavy that role can feel. Tell me what you would have done. I looked up at Mr. Callahan. Does Mateo know I've seen this? No. I closed the binder carefully. Good. He studied me. What are you thinking? I took a slow breath. I'm thinking, I said evenly, that I won't sign anything. And beyond that, I felt something settle inside me. Not rage, not revenge, just alignment. I'm thinking, I said, that I've been reacting to my brother my whole life, and I'm done reacting. Mr. Callahan nodded once. There may be pushback. I expect it. When I left the office, my phone was buzzing again. 3 missed calls from Mateo. 2 texts. We're running out of time. Call me now. I stood on the sidewalk downtown, traffic moving around me, sunlight reflecting off glass buildings. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't collapsing. I wasn't scrambling to defend myself. I was still, protected, in ways I now understood. I typed one message back. We'll discuss everything at the house tonight. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, one reply came through. Fine. And I knew this wasn't going to stay private. This wasn't going to stay quiet. The collision had just been delayed, not avoided. I didn't go straight to the house that night. I went to work. That might sound small, but it wasn't. For 4 days, my life had been consumed by legal documents, debt figures, and the shifting ground of my childhood. I'd been operating in reaction mode, waiting for the next call, the next reveal, the next pressure tactic. But when I walked into the clinic that afternoon, the smell of antiseptic and eucalyptus hit me, and something in my nervous system steadied. Mrs. Alvarez was waiting for me in treatment room 3, 68 years old, hip replacement recovery, stubborn in the way only former elementary school principals can be. You look tired, she said immediately. Family stuff, I replied, strapping on gloves. She narrowed her eyes. Family stuff is the worst stuff. I almost smiled. As I guided her through weight-bearing exercises, something shifted in me. The body is honest. It doesn't care about inheritance disputes or manipulation. It responds to pressure, resistance, consistency. Healing is mechanical before it's emotional. Again, I told her gently as she tried to sit too quickly. She grimaced. You're not letting me cheat, are you? No. She studied my face. Good, she said. Don't let anyone else cheat either. The words landed harder than she knew. By the end of my shift, my head was clearer, not calmer, clearer. I wasn't a powerless younger sister standing in a flickering kitchen anymore. I was a 32-year-old professional with credentials, income, and, now, a legally protected financial foundation. That realization didn't inflate me. It grounded me. On my way home, I didn't blast music. I didn't rehearse arguments. I thought about structure. Dad believed in structure. He believed in systems. That's how he built the shop from nothing. And he had structured this. 2 trusts. Separate authority. Legal firewalls. He hadn't chosen sides. He'd balanced risk. The house was quiet when I arrived. Mateo's BMW was already in the driveway again, parked exactly where Dad used to park. Symbolism isn't subtle in families like ours. He was in the living room when I walked in. The lights were on, though it was barely dusk. Papers were spread across the coffee table. His laptop was open. He looked up. "You took your time." I had patience. His jaw tightened slightly. "This is urgent." "For you." Silence stretched between us. He stood slowly. "Did you meet with Callahan?" "Yes." "And?" I set my bag down deliberately. "And I understand the trust structures." He stilled. "Good," he said carefully. "Then you know cooperation is the logical move." I watched him closely. He didn't ask what I knew. He assumed. Classic Mateo. "The revocable trust requires both signatures," he continued. "If we unlock it, we stabilize the business, protect Dad's legacy, avoid foreclosure." "And the irrevocable trust?" I asked calmly. There it was. The flicker. Tiny, but unmistakable. His posture shifted a fraction. "What about it?" he said. "It's solely mine." The room went very still. For a split second, something flashed across his face. Calculation. So he hadn't been sure whether I knew. "You're mistaken," he said smoothly. "That one's inactive." "No," I replied. "It isn't." Silence. Then he did what he always does. He pivoted. "Okay," he said, voice lowering. "Yes, that trust exists. Dad set it up years ago, but it was always intended as family security, not personal." "Interesting," I said, "because legally, it's personal." He walked toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You think this is a game?" he asked quietly. "No." "You think I'm trying to steal from you?" "I think you omitted information." His head turned slightly. "Because I knew you'd react emotionally." I almost laughed. "That's rich." He turned fully now. "Elena, listen to me carefully. The business debt is real. If it collapses, the bank takes the house, Dad's house. The shop gets liquidated. 33 years of work gone. And whose name is on the loans?" His jaw flexed. "Mine." "Then it's your liability." He took a step closer. "You would really sit back and watch everything burn?" There it was. The guilt hook. The one he'd used since we were kids. The one that worked because I cared. "I'm not sitting back," I said calmly. "I'm refusing to be cornered." He stared at me like he was seeing someone unfamiliar. "This isn't about you being cornered. It's about responsibility." "I have responsibility," I said. "To myself." The words felt new in my mouth. Not defiant. Just true. He scoffed softly. "You've always been selfish in subtle ways." That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it was his old tactic. Reframe independence as betrayal. "If protecting myself is selfish," I said evenly, "then yes." "Was at the hospital," I said again. "You was at the hospital," I said again. "You were signing papers." Silence. We stood there, the weight of years between us. And then he said something he'd never said before. "I had to step up because you wouldn't." That hit deeper than anything else, because it revealed the story he'd built in his own head, that he was the martyr, the savior, the one who carried the burden. And I was the absent daughter who chose comfort. "I didn't ask you to carry anything for me," I said quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he shifted again. New tactic. "Fine," he said. "Keep your trust. But unlock the revocable one. 50-50 control. That's fair." Fair. A word that sounds noble and often isn't. "Why?" I asked calmly. "To show unity." To show the bank liquidity, I corrected. His eyes narrowed slightly. You think I can't recover from this without you? I don't know, I said. Can you? That landed. The silence this time wasn't tactical. It was real. He didn't answer. Because the truth was complicated. The business was struggling. The market was unstable. And maybe, just maybe, he had made decisions that were riskier than he ever admitted. I won't sign tonight, I said finally. And when will you? When I see full accounting, every loan, every transaction, every withdrawal. That will take time. Then take it. He stared at me. You've changed, he said. No, I replied softly. I've just stopped shrinking. The words surprised even me. He looked away first. And in that tiny, almost invisible shift, power moved. Not dramatically, not publicly, but internally. For the first time in my life, I wasn't negotiating from guilt. I was negotiating from steadiness. If you've ever had that moment where you realize you don't have to win loudly, you just have to refuse quietly, type karma in your head. Because something was building. Not revenge. Revelation. Mateo picked up his laptop slowly. We'll reconvene in a week, he said coolly. Send the documents. I will. As I walked toward the door, he added, if the bank accelerates the loan, it won't be on me alone. I paused. That's not how contracts work. And I left. In the car, my hands were steady. Not shaking. Not trembling. Steady. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. And something told me Mateo wasn't done. He'd pivot again. He always did. But this time, I wasn't 13 on the back steps. I had legal clarity, financial insulation, and something far more dangerous to him than anger. Patience. The bank letter arrived on a Thursday. Certified mail. Thick envelope. Corporate logo in the corner. The kind of paper that feels heavier than it is. I stared at it on my kitchen counter for a full minute before opening it. Notice of intent to accelerate. If the outstanding balance on the commercial loans was not addressed within 30 days, the bank reserved the right to demand full repayment and initiate asset seizure proceedings. 30 days. So Mateo hadn't been exaggerating about that part. He'd just been selective about everything else. My phone buzzed before I even finished reading the letter. Mateo. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. You got it, he said immediately. Not a question. Yes. We need to move. We need transparency, I corrected. A tight exhale on the other end. There's a meeting tomorrow, he said. At the bank. 10 a.m. I added your name. I'm not on the loan. You're on the trust. That was the collision point. He was trying to blur the lines legally and psychologically. If I showed up, if I sat at that table, it implied shared responsibility. But I also knew something else. Showing up doesn't equal surrender. I'll be there, I said. The bank building downtown was all glass and steel and temperature-controlled air. Mateo was already in the conference room when I walked in. Navy suit again, perfectly composed. Across from him sat a woman in her mid-40s with sharp glasses and sharper posture. Ms. Marquez, she said, standing. I'm Dana Whitfield, Senior Commercial Lending Officer. I shook her hand. We sat. The room smelled like polished wood and filtered coffee. Dana folded her hands. The situation is straightforward, she began. The loans were restructured last year under expansion projections. Those projections were not met. Mateo didn't interrupt. He let her speak. Strategic silence. The collateral includes the business property and the residential property tied to the refinancing, she continued. We require either significant principal reduction or a liquidation plan. And if neither occurs? I asked calmly. Acceleration. Translation. They take everything. Matteo leaned forward slightly. We're exploring liquidity options, he said. Family-held trusts. There it was again. Family-held. Dana glanced at me. Are you a signatory on the loan, Ms. Marquez? No, I said evenly. Do you intend to become one? No. Matteo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Dana nodded once. Then our discussion remains with Mr. Marquez. The air shifted. Subtly, but definitively. Matteo pivoted. Elena controls an irrevocable trust established by our father, he said. It would be logical for those funds to protect the family assets. Dana's expression didn't change. Is the trust legally obligated to satisfy the debt? No, I answered. Then it is not relevant to the bank's position. The silence that followed was surgical. Matteo's composure didn't break, but something behind his eyes did. He wasn't used to losing control of a room. Mr. Marquez, Dana continued, if you can produce a credible repayment strategy within 30 days, we can avoid formal acceleration. But we require documentation. Documentation, proof, transparency. The very thing I'd demanded. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Outside the building, Matteo walked faster than usual. His jaw was tight. You blindsided me in there, he said quietly. I answered honestly. You made it look like I was alone. You are. He stopped walking. Cars moved past us. The city hummed. You think this is about winning? He asked. No, I said. It's about accuracy. He laughed once, short and sharp. You've always loved being technically right. And you've always loved controlling the narrative. That landed. We stood facing each other on the sidewalk where strangers brushed past without noticing the war happening in low voices. I stepped in when Dad couldn't, he said. You have no idea how bad it was. Then show me, I replied calmly. Every transaction, every risk, every decision. He hesitated. That hesitation said more than any spreadsheet could. Because if everything had been clean, he would have already shown me. Some of the withdrawals, he began carefully, were strategic. For the business? Yes. All of them? His eyes flicked away for half a second. And there it was. Not embezzlement. Not cartoon villain behavior. Something subtler. Lines blurred. Personal expenses justified as temporary bridges. Lifestyle maintained while debt accumulated. I felt it click into place. You leveraged the house, I said quietly. And you kept living like revenue hadn't dropped. That's not fair. Is it inaccurate? Silence. His voice dropped. I couldn't let people see weakness. There it was. The truth. Not greed. Not hatred. Image. He needed to be the capable son, the one who stepped up, the one who saved everything. And when the numbers didn't cooperate, he doubled down. If you've ever watched someone protect their pride at the expense of reality, you know how dangerous that can become. You could have told me, I said. You would have panicked. I would have adjusted. He shook his head slightly. You don't understand business pressure. I understand pressure, I said. I just don't hide it under debt. The words hung between us. He looked tired for the first time, not defeated, just exposed. 30 days, he said finally. If I can't restructure, they take the house. Our house, I corrected softly. He met my eyes, and for a brief second, the sibling dynamic resurfaced. Not power struggle, not manipulation. Just shared history, but it passed quickly. So what's your move? He asked. It wasn't sarcastic. It was genuine. And that was the shift. He was no longer directing. He was asking. I'm not unlocking anything, I said calmly. But I'm willing to review options that don't involve me absorbing your liability. Such as? Selling non-essential assets, downsizing operations, transparency with vendors, negotiating extended terms. That's damage control. Yes. His jaw tightened again. You'd let the business shrink. I'd let it survive. Silence. Because survival doesn't look impressive. It looks humbling. And Matteo had never been good at humble. He looked at me differently then. Not as the younger sister. Not as the emotional liability. But as someone steady. Protected. In ways he hadn't fully calculated. You've changed, he said again. No, I replied. I've stabilized. The word seemed to land. He didn't argue. We stood there for another few seconds. Then he said something unexpected. Dad always trusted you with money. I blinked. He told me once, Matteo continued quietly, that you think long-term. The confession wasn't defensive. It was almost reluctant admiration. And you? I asked. He said I think fast. Fast. That was the difference. Fast can build. Fast can also overreach. I'm not your enemy, I said softly. He looked at me for a long time. I know, he said. But knowing and accepting aren't the same thing. As I walked back to my car, I felt something crest internally. Not victory. Not revenge. Balance. The power dynamic had shifted publicly now. At the bank. In front of a third party. He couldn't frame me as emotional. He couldn't blur liability. He couldn't maneuver without documentation. And for someone who thrives on narrative control, that's destabilizing. My phone buzzed once more as I got in. A message from Mr. Callahan. I believe it's time you review the full expansion contracts. There are signatures you should see. Signatures. Plural. My chest tightened. Because if Matteo had signed something he shouldn't have, if there were guarantees made without full disclosure, then this wasn't just about debt anymore. It was about representation. And suddenly, the collision felt incomplete. The real exposure hadn't even begun. I met Mr. Callahan at his office again, but this time he didn't offer coffee. He offered documents. Stacks of them, neatly tabbed, highlighted, organized in a way that told me he'd been preparing for this moment. Before you open anything, he said carefully, I want you to understand something. None of this is criminal. That was not the reassurance he thought it was. It's structural, he continued. And ethically, gray. Gray. I nodded once. Show me. He slid the first contract across the desk. Commercial equipment financing agreement. Date. 11 months ago. Borrower. Marquez Auto LLC. Managing member signature. Matteo Marquez. Personal guarantee. Matteo Marquez. So far, consistent. The next document was a line of credit expansion. Same structure. Then he handed me the third folder. This one thinner. This, he said quietly, is where it becomes complicated. I opened it. Refinancing agreement. Residential property collateralized. Primary homeowner listed, Daniel Marquez. Co-signing authority, Matteo Marquez. Acting under durable power of attorney. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. That's what happens when something clicks into place. Power of attorney, I said evenly. Yes. When was it activated? 8 months ago. After your father's second hospitalization. My throat tightened. Was he competent at the time? Yes, Mr. Callahan said. But fatigued. He authorized Matteo to assist with operational matters. Assist. That word again. I kept reading. There it was. A clause. Funds dispersed from the refinance account into the primary business account. And then, 2 weeks later, a transfer. Large. Unusual. Destination, Marquez Holdings Consulting. I looked up slowly. That's not the shop. No. What is it? A separate LLC formed 6 months ago. By who? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Matteo. I kept reading. Marquez Holdings Consulting had issued management service invoices back to the auto shop. High amounts, consulting fees, performance incentives, expense reimbursements, all during a period when revenue had dipped. My hands felt steady, cold, but steady. He paid himself, I said quietly. Yes. From borrowed money? Yes. The room was silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning. He justified it as executive restructuring compensation, Mr. Callahan said carefully. Legally defensible, morally debatable. Debatable. That was generous. He moved money from the refinance into the business, I said, piecing it together. Then funneled a portion back out through a secondary entity. Yes. Without explicitly telling Dad. He disclosed the transfers as operational adjustments. Operational adjustments. The language almost impressed me. If you've ever watched someone repackage self-preservation as strategy, you understand the precision of that wording. Did Dad question it? I asked. He asked for summaries, Mr. Callahan said. He trusted your brother's interpretation. Trusted. I closed the folder. So the debt isn't just expansion risk, I said. It's lifestyle preservation. Yes. The truth didn't explode inside me. It settled. Heavy. Measured. For years, Mateo had been crafting an identity, the competent son, the decisive leader, the one who stepped up. And when revenue dipped, instead of shrinking operations, he maintained image. He paid himself as if growth had occurred. He financed confidence, with collateral, with borrowed money, with our father's house. Does he think I know this? I asked. No? Does he think it can stay buried? He likely believes it's explainable. Explainable. I almost smiled. It was. Technically. That's what makes Gray so dangerous. It isn't theft. It isn't fraud. It's justification layered over pride. Can the bank see this? I asked. Yes. If they audit deeply. And if they do? They may classify certain transfers as risk amplification, which would accelerate foreclosure. I leaned back in the chair. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. This wasn't about sibling rivalry. This wasn't about favoritism. This was copies? I asked. They're yours. When I copies? I asked. They're yours. When I walked out of that office, the city looked sharper somehow, edges more defined. I didn't call Mateo immediately. I waited. That evening, he texted. Have you reviewed the documents yet? Yes. I have. And? I'd like to meet. At the house. Tomorrow. A pause. Then. Fine. The next evening, the living room felt different. Not tense. Anticipatory. Mateo stood near the fireplace. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. You formed Marquez Holdings, I said calmly. He didn't flinch. Yes. You billed the shop consulting fees. Yes. You paid yourself from refinance-backed liquidity. His jaw tightened slightly. It was compensation. For growth that didn't occur. For leadership. Silence. Dad didn't understand the structure, I said. He approved it. He trusted you. That landed. He stepped closer to the table. You think I stole from him? I think you protected your image. His voice sharpened. I carried this place while you were building your comfortable little career. There it was again. The story he told himself. I didn't react. You leveraged the house, I said evenly, and then maintained executive-level compensation. It wasn't excessive. It was unsustainable. Silence. His composure wavered. Not dramatically. Just enough. You don't know what pressure feels like, he said. I do, I replied. I just don't convert it into ego. That hit. Hard. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, but the documents were sitting there. Paper doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It just exists. And in that existence, narratives collapse. If the bank audits fully, I said calmly, they'll see this. He swallowed. And if they do, they'll question risk management. And then restructuring becomes less favorable. Silence stretched. You'd expose me? He asked quietly. I'd expose the structure. He stared at me. You always wanted to prove you were smarter. No, I said softly. I just wanted to be equal. That changed the air. Because for the first time, this wasn't about money. It was about a lifetime of imbalance. He looked tired. Really tired. What do you want? He asked. Not defiant. Not sarcastic. Honest. And that was the final shift. Power had moved completely now. Not because I yelled, not because I threatened, because I had documentation and I wasn't afraid of it. I want full transparency with the bank, I said. No unlocked trusts. No narrative spinning. And if they take the house? Then we sell before they do. His breath caught. Slightly. That's Dad's house. Yes. The word hung heavy. Protected. In ways we hadn't understood. Dad hadn't protected the house. He'd protected stability. And stability sometimes requires letting symbols go. Mateo looked at the folder again, then back at me. For the first time in my life. He didn't try to redirect me, he didn't reframe, he didn't guilt. He just stood there and understood that the version of me he relied on, the shrinking one, the apologetic one, the redirectable one, was gone. 30 days later, we signed the listing agreement. The house went on the market quietly. No dramatic family announcement, no public explanation. Just a clean, controlled decision made in a conference room with a real estate agent who didn't know the history of the dining table or the crack in the hallway tile. Mateo didn't argue. That was the strangest part. He tried once, half-heartedly, to negotiate timing. But the bank had already flagged the loan for high-risk review. The consulting transfers had come up during preliminary auditing, not labeled as misconduct, just instability. And instability costs leverage. We sold before acceleration, not at peak value, but enough to clear the refinance portion and reduce the commercial balance significantly. The shop didn't collapse. It shrank. 2 service bays instead of 4. 3 mechanics instead of 6. No more Marquez Holdings Consulting. That LLC was dissolved quietly, no announcement, no speech, just paperwork filed with the state. If you've ever watched Pride get downsized into reality, you know it doesn't happen with fireworks. It happens with silence. The revocable trust remained locked. We never touched it. The irrevocable trust, the one Dad placed in my name 12 years ago, remained intact. Protected. In ways I now fully understood. I didn't use it to punish Mateo. I didn't use it to rescue him either. I used a portion for something small and deliberate. 6 months after the sale, I opened my own physical therapy practice. Not flashy, not oversized. 1 treatment room, 1 assistant, 1 clean sign on the door. Marquez Recovery Studio. I kept the name. Not for nostalgia, for architecture. Dad built something with his hands. I built something with mine. Different industries. Same foundation. Slow growth. Measured risk. Transparent books. When I invited Mateo to the opening, he hesitated before responding. Then he came. No grand speech. No forced hug. He stood near the back, hands in his pockets, observing. After most of the guests left, he approached me. It looks solid, he said. Thank you. A pause. You didn't have to keep the name. I wanted to. Another pause. I was wrong, he said. Not dramatic. Not tearful. Just factual. I know, I replied. That's the thing about real apologies. They don't demand forgiveness. They acknowledge impact. I thought if I could keep everything big, he continued quietly, it would mean I succeeded. And if it got smaller? I asked. He looked down briefly. It felt like failure. I nodded. Stability isn't failure. He absorbed that. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, we didn't rewrite history. We stood in a space that felt balanced for the first time in our lives. Boundaries had been drawn. Not with shouting, with structure. The business still exists. Smaller, profitable, transparent. Mateo sends quarterly summaries voluntarily now, not because I demanded oversight, because accountability became part of survival. We don't pretend nothing happened. We reference it carefully, like a scar you don't hide, but don't reopen. The house is gone. That part still aches sometimes. But I realized something the day we handed over the keys. The house was never what Dad was protecting. He was protecting optionality, security, freedom from coercion. He knew us. He knew Mateo would move fast. He knew I would hesitate. So he built legal guardrails around both of us. He didn't choose a favorite. He chose stability. And in doing so, he forced us to confront ourselves. If you've ever been placed in a situation where you had to choose between guilt and clarity, you know how heavy that moment feels. Type karma if you believe truth doesn't need volume to win. A year after everything settled, I visited the beach alone, the same stretch of shoreline. The tide was low again, leaving that thin mirror of water across the sand. I walked to the edge and stood there, wind sharp against my face. I thought about the girl on the back steps, the scraped knee, the redirected questions, the quiet doubt, and I realized something gently, without drama. I wasn't angry at her anymore. She did the best she could with the dynamics she had. But I'm not her. I'm 32. I own my practice. I have savings that don't depend on someone else's narrative. I have boundaries that don't require permission. Mateo and I aren't close in the way people romanticize siblings, but we're honest. And sometimes honesty is a stronger bond than forced loyalty. Last Thanksgiving, he brought wine again. Less expensive this time. He poured it without performance. At one point, he said quietly across the table, "Elena thinks long term." He didn't say it like a joke. He said it like a fact. Protected. In ways we didn't yet understand. That phrase still echoes in me. Because protection doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like legal language. Sometimes it looks like letting something shrink so it doesn't collapse. And sometimes it looks like a daughter who finally stops shrinking. If you've ever had to stand still while someone tried to move you out of your own story, tell me what you would have done. I didn't win. He didn't lose. But the truth came out. And once it did, everything found its proper size. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose clarity over guilt, stability over pressure, or truth over family silence, make sure you subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell stories about betrayal. We tell stories about balance being restored. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have unlocked the trust or held your ground? And I'll see you in the next story.